There's a good chance you're dealing with a middleman, like me, when you get your medicines. That's because PBMs and insurers are often the same company. We even own big chain pharmacies and are buying your doctor's office. We decide what medicines you can get, where you get them, and how much you pay. It's a win-win. For me.
When middlemen own it all, you lose. Visit phrma.org/middlemen to learn more. Paid for by Pharma.
When you have high standards and fancy all the fancy things, like a Dior saddlebag or that diamond tennis bracelet, you go to eBay. There, you'll find new loves that will never disappoint. Expertly authenticated. Whether it's that vintage pearl necklace or brand new ruby earrings, a Prada crossbody bag, or classic watches like that Rolex Oyster or that Cartier tank. On eBay, there are no limits to your high standards. Yeah, eBay. The place for new, pre-loved, vintage, and rare fashion. eBay. Things people love.
This week, when you click on Netflix, you can see an hour-and-a-half window into Washington's political transformation. Or that's what the streaming service would like you to believe. Netflix is broadcasting the ceremony for the Kennedy Center's Mark Twain Prize for American Humor. This year, it was Conan O'Brien getting honored. And the event was recorded just a few weeks after President Trump appointed himself as the chairman of the Kennedy Center's board. It cast something of a pall over the whole night. Like, here's how Triumph the Insult comic dog started the evening.
Thank you all for coming, and shame on you for being here. That should cover it, yes?
I wanted to know how all these jokes landed. So I called up Katy Waldman from The New Yorker. She was in the audience.
I was reporting on the broader takeover of the center. And so I just kind of wanted to see what would happen. I also sort of thought that, oh, Conan O'Brien, he's definitely going to pull out. He has so much capital and goodwill because of the Oscars.
So you were surprised he showed up?
Yeah.
Katy says this broadcast does not exactly skewer our political moment. Part of the problem, she says, is Conan himself. His humor is so self-deprecating that it's impossible to see him as the animating force of some kind of opposition movement. The closest he came to rallying his audience came in the speech he gave accepting his prize.
This honor feels very different to me. I think accepting an award named after Mark Twain is a responsibility.
He shouts out Mark Twain lovingly. But the comparison he makes with Trump here is implicit, not explicit.
He punched up, not down, and he deeply, deeply empathized with the weak. Twain.
New York Magazine said that the show sent a sly message of resistance.
Yeah, I was not picking that up. It seems like, the runtime was almost 4 hours, and the proportion of jokes that were about Trump was very small. They didn't say Trump's name.
They didn't say Trump's name at all?
No.
You went to an after party too, right? After the awards show?
I did, yeah.
What was the vibe there like?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I think it depends on who you talk to. My attention was really drawn to the Kennedy Center employees because it had been obviously a very rough few weeks for them. And there was a kind of gallows humor emanating from the groups and a sort of edginess and a lot of wondering what the next week would bring, especially because what I heard was there were a bunch of people waiting to resign until after the Mark Twain Prize was over.
Is that what happened? Immediately after the Mark Twain Prizes, all of a sudden people were dropping?
Actually, even kind of grimmer, immediately after the Mark Twain Prize, a bunch of people were fired.
Today on the show, why the real drama at the Kennedy Center is behind the scenes and may reveal how art itself is changing in 2025. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today? smart choice. Progressive loves to help people make smart choices, and that's why they offer a tool called Auto Quote Explorer that allows you to compare your Progressive car insurance quote with rates from other companies, so you can save time on the research and can enjoy savings when you choose the best rate for you. Give it a try after this episode at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states and situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
She's made up her mind to live pretty smart. Learn to budget responsibly right from the start. She spends a little less and puts more into savings. Keeps her blood pressure low and credit score raises. She's cutting debt right out of her life. She tracks her cash flow on a spreadsheet at night.
Boring money moves make kind of lame songs, but they sound pretty sweet to your wallet. PNC Bank, brilliantly boring since 1865.
Can we go back in time a little bit and maybe just talk about the Kennedy Center and its role in Washington, D.C. culture, how it came to exist in the first place? It opened in 1971. Where did it come from? Why was it important to D.C. to have an institution like this one?
Yeah, so I think the original impetus for it was this was the end of World War II, and President Eisenhower wanted to kind of lift the country's spirits and bring them into a sort of peacetime mentality and to sort of promulgate the soft power of the country through arts and culture. And then after President Kennedy was assassinated, this sort of plan that was on the back burner for having a cultural institution fused with a desire to honor President Kennedy and his own personal commitment to the arts. And so the Kennedy Center was born, and it was sort of a trifecta. It was the cultural hub that Eisenhower envisioned. It was a performing arts stage, and it was a living memorial to President Kennedy.
Yeah, and we should say, like, the Kennedy Center looks like a memorial, like something on the mall. It has all these columns. It's right on the Potomac River. And then you go inside, red carpets everywhere, soaring ceilings. It's intentionally looking in this way, like a very official, grand place.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I should say, speaking of the sort of monumental qualities of it, I did come across like a 1971 column by the architecture critic Ada Louise Huxtable, who reviewed the Kennedy Center when it was first opened, and she hated it. She says, the building with its overscaled vacuity is to the Washington manner born. Too bad, since there is so much of it. And then she called it a super bunker and said that if there was another one close to the Potomac, the whole city would sink.
It does kind of sit there like a brick. It doesn't sound like a place that's been known for taking artistic risks. Yeah, because it's just not that kind of venue.
No, I think the point is to make everyone feel welcome. It stays safe, but safe in a sort of like warm and friendly way.
How did Donald Trump think about the Kennedy Center during his first term? Like, was it even, because it's so notable to me that he came in and made himself chairman of the board right away this time. But last time, was he thinking of the Kennedy Center in this central way?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, too, because sort of the buzzy thing that happened in the sort of Trump v. Kennedy Center narrative in the first term was that artists who had been awarded this very prestigious prize, the Kennedy Center Honors, which happens every year, some of them threatened to boycott the ceremony if Trump attended. And this was right after Charlottesville. So it's not just like they were being sort of political for no reason, like something really kind of awful had just happened. And they were saying, well, given this sympathy with neo-Nazis, we're not going to come to the Kennedy Center Honors if Trump is there.
Does not seem unreasonable to me.
Right. That's a pretty principled artistic decision. And Trump said, OK, fine, I'll let you have your ceremony in peace. And I will also, I'm not going to have a reception at the White House for any of the artists who have received this award. And starting then, he has never done anything for the Kennedy Center honors, which, you know, was kind of a splashy news story, but didn't affect the operations of the Kennedy Center much. And in fact, some of the people I talked to for my story, they were saying, they had, you know, a perfectly fine relationship, the Kennedy Center and the White House. Like the presidential box in the concert hall was filled almost every night. So he was offering this as sort of like a perk to people visiting. It was fine. But you are absolutely right to point out that this is not kind of the approach that Trump has taken in his second term. He has sort of done much more of a Doge style takeover, where it's just like going in with a chainsaw and just like hacking up a pretty delicate ecosystem and then sort of like throwing a patch of AstroTurf down on top and being like, see, it's great.
I mean, he ousted Deborah Rutter, who'd served as the Kennedy Center president since 2014. He replaced her with Richard Grenell, who's mainly been a foreign policy advisor to Trump until now. Does Grenell have any connection with the performing arts?
So this, I think, is like Trump's weird central casting / like reductive views of how identity works happening. It's like Rick Grenell, well, I guess he did spend some time in Hollywood, but he is the highest profile, openly gay member of like Trump's circle. And so I kind of wonder whether Trump thought, oh, you could do theater. You know,
you're into the arts.
Yeah, because you're right. Like Grenell is, you know, he's like an ambassador. He came up through the UN. He did, I think, like the National Security Council. He also just, according to basically everyone who I've talked to who has interacted with him personally, is a pretty terrible human being.
Well, why do you say that?
Because like the quotes are something like, this is the worst person I've ever met.
Whoa.
Yeah, just like a really kind of cruel and combative guy.
What has he done since he's taken over? Like, has that cruelty been manifest?
I think the ways in which he has fired people or laid people off has been somewhat heartless. And there's just been a lot of slippery explanations to take one example, several shows with LGBTQ themes have been canceled at the Kennedy Center. There was like an email exchange that leaked between Grenell and an artist who wrote to him to sort of ask what was up with that. And he was really antagonistic and sort of angry speaking to this artist. And I think that kind of reflects a broader ethos of sort of like, don't cede any ground, come in hot, attack.
I mean, Trump and some of the officials he's put in charge have basically said the Kennedy Center is in financial disarray. What's the reality of its financial situation? Because your reporting really explains why it's more complicated than that, just because of how arts institutions function.
You know, from what I could tell, it was, you know, it was flourishing and it had money and it was doing what it was supposed to be doing.
Pre-Trump.
Yes, pre-Trump. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the operating expenses were, it wasn't always making more money than it spent on its programming, but because its sources of revenue were not just box office, but were also gifts and donations, it was still overall in the black. And it seems like what the new leadership at the Kennedy Center is trying to convey to the public is, you know, in the past, the Kennedy Center was putting on shows that didn't make money, and we're going to stop that because that was bad business. And I think what the previous leadership would say to that is it's actually good business, because even if we don't make money on these sort of more experimental or more niche shows, we are fulfilling the mission of the center, which is to represent the diversity of American culture. And that's going to pull a lot of donations from people who agree with that vision.
Well, and ticket sales are down now, too, post-Trump.
Oh, right. Like that's a whole different part of the picture, which is no matter how well or badly the center was doing before Trump, like this sort of Trump anti-Midas touch is in operation here. And now everything is worse. So, not only are our ticket sales down, but donations have been paused, artists are pulling out. All of the sort of spigots for money have slowed or been turned off.
I mean, you spoke with Mary Helen Bowers, ballet dancer who's quite conservative, who's been on the Kennedy Center board since the end of Trump's first term. Did she have a vision for what the Kennedy Center programming would look like going forward? And was she optimistic about that?
She seemed very optimistic. I mean, she said that the world's greatest businessman is stepping in to right the ship of the Kennedy Center. And so we're all going to be blessed with great art in the future. But one thing that has been pretty striking about the new leadership is they don't really have a coherent vision for what the art of the Kennedy Center is actually going to be. So we have a quote from Grinnell saying there will be a great big celebration of Christ at Christmas. And we have Trump saying more Broadway shows. But beyond that, I haven't really been able to get a good sense of what they want.
So Cats and Christ?
Cats and Christ with a side of Phantom of the Opera.
When we come back, if this administration has such a loose idea of what it wants its art to look like, what does that mean for the people making art all over the country? This episode is brought to you by Discover. It's smart to always have a few financial goals. And here's a really smart one you can set: earning cash back on what you buy every day. With Discover, you can. Get this. Discover automatically matches all the cash back you've earned at the end of your first year. Seriously, all of it. Discover trusts you to make smart decisions. After all, you listen to this podcast. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
PMS, pregnancy, menopause. Being a woman is a lot. Ollie supports you and yours with expert solutions for every age and life stage. They just launched 2 new products exclusively at Walmart. Period Hero combats bloat, mood swings, and more during PMS. And Balance Perimeno to support hormonal balance, mood, and metabolism during perimenopause. Grab yours at ollie.com. Ollie! These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Not everyone is careful with your personal information, which might explain why there's a victim of identity theft every 5 seconds in the U.S. Fortunately, there's LifeLock. LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats to your identity. If your identity is stolen, a U.S.-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year by visiting lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
At the same time, the Trump administration is using the Kennedy Center as a laboratory for its ideas about arts and culture. They also hold the purse strings for a whole lot of artists who rely on federal funding to support their work. I called up Alisa Solomon to tell me more about that. She's the director of the Arts and Culture Concentration at Columbia Journalism School. And recently, she's been writing about what's happening at the National Endowment for the Arts. I asked her to start out by telling me what we know about the kind of art the president and his administration want to support.
We know a little bit of the kind of art he supports. We know that his tastes are given to lots of gold, glittery, shiny, gilded tchotchkes all over the White House. He has spoken a number of times about wanting to create a garden of statues of heroes.
What kind of heroes?
I think he wants a statue of Elvis. I think he wants Andrew Jackson, different military heroes, presidents, and some cultural figures whom he admires in a kind of realistic mode. He doesn't like abstract art. He isn't interested in modernism, but he is a watcher, and he has an understanding of how powerful cultural representation is and how it shapes perception. I mean, he's a reality TV star. He knows how that works. If you think about, for example, the film of the people who were seized, the Venezuelans who were seized and taken to El Salvador, and that kind of a horror film of shackled men having, being frog marched and having their heads shaved. That's a film doing very specific propagandistic work. Or, apparently he wants to have a big parade on his birthday, that kind of spectacle. These are cultural forms. So if you ask what kind of art does he like, I'd say sort of fascist style spectacle.
How did you first get the sense that the NEA was beginning to shift what it wanted to fund under Donald Trump?
In January, the guidelines for NEA grants were changed, and they asserted that applicants had to show that they were not engaged in any kind of DEI initiatives or efforts. And they also had to show that they were not involved in promoting so-called gender ideology.
I assume this doesn't mean cis-het gender ideology.
I mean, God only knows what gender ideology is. But I think everybody understood that it meant that trans artists or art that involves trans people or that talks about trans people or represents them was not going to be allowed by a government that has declared against all evidence of history and science that trans people don't exist.
Did artists just accept that?
No, they sued on the grounds both that this was a content restriction and also, again, because it was asserted from on high and not through the allocations and guidelines that Congress is authorized to make.
In a piece published in The Nation this March, you wrote that arts organizations in this country aren't centralized and cannot be doged, which I thought was a good observation. But are we seeing ways that the administration is trying to doge them anyway?
Unfortunately, yes. Just a couple of days ago, Friday night, a lot of arts organizations around the country, we don't really know how many yet, but certainly scores of them, received emails announcing that their NEA grants were not going to be granted. Even some that already had been granted, they were basically told they were not going to get them.
On what basis?
On the basis that the administration has other priorities. And among those priorities, I should just pull it up and read it specifically because it's very surprising, actually, in the context of the attacks on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So they got an email that said, the NEA is updating its grant-making policy priorities to focus funding on projects that reflect the nation's rich artistic heritage and creativity as prioritized by the president. Consequently, we are terminating awards that fall outside these new priorities. The NEA will now prioritize projects that elevate the nation's HBCUs.
Historically Black universities?
Yep. And it goes on. So HBCUs, Hispanic serving institutions that celebrate the 250th anniversary of American independence, foster AI competency, empower houses of worship to serve communities, assist with disaster recovery, foster skilled trade jobs, make America healthy again, support the military and veterans, support tribal communities, make the District of Columbia safe and beautiful, and support the economic development of Asian American communities.
What a weird grab bag.
Yeah, weird indeed, Harry. It's like, what a hodgepodge.
Is there an upside here that like almost any artist could make a case for whatever they're doing under these broad priorities and potentially maintain funding?
Well, you would think so, except that the institutions, many of the institutions that have already been told that they're losing their funding, already do those things. American Theater Magazine reported the other day, for example, that there's the Chicago Latino Theater Alliance, which you would think would be a Hispanic serving institution, was one of the institutions that got the email saying that its grant was not going to be followed through on. So it sounds very contradictory.
You laid out sort of what the administration said were its new priorities for the NEA. One thing that stood out to me in the list of priorities was, quote, fostering AI competency. And this stood out to me because artificial intelligence seems to me to be the opposite of art. It's like collage, but like not collage with a brain behind it. Like it's just random internet vomit. And it's interesting to me to say that's a priority for the NEA moving forward. First of all, I'm not sure we need federal funding to like create more of it. There seems to be plenty already.
Well, there's plenty of AI. Whether there's competency is another question, and what they mean by that. That's a very tricky area because artificial intelligence is one of those areas that a lot of artists are exploring. But of course, with a a human creative imagination, at the control deck, right? It's not just feeding something into ChatGPT and say, write me a sonnet in the style of Shakespeare. But it is a very odd thing. I agree. It's a very odd thing in that list. The other thing that I think goes along with that, when you say like, does it really need federal money? Because it's a commercial enterprise, right? The arts projects that the National Endowment for the Arts has been supporting are, by definition, have to be nonprofit. And so one of the things that may be happening is the thinking about this kind of funds is that it should go to arts production that makes money, that is to commercial work, and forget the nonprofits. But that's to misunderstand that there are certain things in a society, in a nation, in a culture that cannot pay for themselves in monetary terms, but are valuable in other ways. And that's why we support them, or that's why we need to support them.
So if you're an artist right now, where are you getting your money? Because I'm assuming that the National Endowment for the Arts has been really important to fostering the careers of young artists.
It's been important to fostering careers of young artists and, middle-aged and even older artists. And at the same time, it's not that much money. And that's the other thing that's important about this idea, because I think it's more symbolic. Not that the money is meaningless. If you're an institution with, let's say, a $300,000 budget and you get $25,000 for a particular project from the National Endowment for the Arts, that if that money gets taken away, you can't do that project. I mean, it's really that simple. If you're, say, Lincoln Center, and you have a multi-million-dollar budget and you lose a $40,000 grant from the NEA, it's a bummer, but it's not gonna grind your work to a halt.
So in 5 years' time, what do you expect art to look like in this country?
I don't think it's going to look terribly different because artists are scrappy. They are going to make their work. It's not easy to be an artist anywhere, certainly not in this country. Most artists barely scrape together a living, and they do it because they have to do it. So they will find a way to keep doing it, and we will still have arts institutions. Some of our bigger institutions might downsize. We already know that the National Endowment's own directors, the people who head the different grant categories, are already leaving. Some got incentives to retire. Some are just leaving because, they see the writing on the wall. So we might not have a National Endowment for the Arts or for the Humanities anymore. And that certainly will have an impact on funding, but I don't think it means we're not going to have artists or theaters or symphony orchestras or jazz ensembles or art museums or any of the many smaller efforts that happen, all around the country in practically every part of the United States.
Alisa, I'm really grateful for your reporting and your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
Alisa Solomon is the director of the Arts and Culture Concentration at the Columbia Journalism School. Earlier in the show, I spoke to Katy Waldman. She's a staff writer at The New Yorker. And that's our show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, Ethan Oberman, Isabel, Angell, and Madeline Ducharme. Ben Richmond is the senior director of podcast operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. You can go track me down on Blue Sky, say hello. I'm at Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time.
Six months from now, you could be running a 5K, booking that dream trip, or seeing thicker, fuller hair every time you look in the mirror. Through Hers, you can get dermatologist-trusted, clinically proven prescriptions with ingredients that go beyond what over-the-counter products offer. Whether you prefer oral or topical treatments, Hers has you covered. Getting started is simple. Just fill out an intake form online, and a licensed provider will recommend a customized plan just for you. The best part? Everything is 100% online. If prescribed, your treatment ships right to your door. No pharmacy trips, no waiting rooms, and no insurance headaches. Plus, treatments start at just $35 a month. Start your initial free online visit today at forhers.com/talk. That's FORHERS.com/talk. Compounded products are not FDA approved or verified for safety, effectiveness, or quality. Prescription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. See website for full details, restrictions, and important safety information.